Okay, so now I'm going to go into some advice that's going to apply to kind of everything we talked about just now. So the first thing is that you are driving the structure of these interviews and you're managing the clock. If you rely on the interviewer to do that, you will not do well in these interviews. So after they ask you the question, hey, build a product for gardening, don't just like start saying stuff, okay? It's not a regular conversation. You're not having coffee. This is a game that you're playing, and you need to demonstrate that you understand this game. So you state your assumptions, and then you walk them through your plan for how you want to spend the time together. I'll show you exactly what this means. You don't have to ask clarifying questions if you don't genuinely need answers. I would rather you state assumptions for the sake of time. And don't be ashamed to show like you're really prepared. So if you have a real clear structure, that's great. And then throughout this interview, try to be assertive but not aggressive. Don't get defensive, but certainly behave like it's your meeting. Second thing I'll say here is you do want to embrace those awkward silences to think, and they do get a little bit of getting used to, or they do take a little bit of getting used to, but each of those pauses that I mentioned can usually last somewhere between like a minute to 2 minutes, maybe. That's okay. It's really not a problem if the interviewer has to just sit there quietly while you're thinking. In the product sense in particular, if you fill that space by thinking out loud, it will hurt you because it's going to hurt your succinct communication scores. So, while this is not about speaking, my last piece of advice on this topic is I really recommend against sharing your screen because once people start watching your screen, it's almost like they're watching you think live. So instead of thinking out loud verbally, you're thinking out loud on paper on your screen, and you're going to start like correcting typos and all this stuff. You might have technical difficulties. That is all really precious time that you cannot afford to burn. I would instead, if you want to use notes on your computer, totally cool to go for it, but just don't share your screen. Just make sure you can do the work you need and then be ready to prepare a story to share, or I'm sorry, to prepare your answer to share back with the interviewer. An anecdote that I will share on this topic is one time I had a candidate who I was interviewing when I was at Facebook, and the candidate chose to share their screen, and it took them 2 minutes to kind of figure out how to share. And then once they started sharing, we were probably 5 minutes into the interview, and they were just like writing a bunch of stuff. So I'm like 7 minutes into the interview, and we haven't even started like a conversation back and forth. That is a failure state. Okay. So I just want you to avoid that happening to you. The next thing I'll say here is that there is no right answer. A lot of people that I help prepare for these interviews think there might be some kind of like specific, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that they're trying to reach and give the exact answer that gets them there. I would say as long as you're making reasonable assumptions and the interviewer can follow your rationale, you can really take this interview in whichever direction you want. Often interviewers will tell you that, which is great, but they're not tricking you. There is really not a right answer. You do need to be clear, you do need to be logical, and you should not contradict yourself. I would set those as guardrails and rules. Now, if an interviewer happens to have some kind of preconceived notion of what the right answer is, you cannot control that and you cannot anticipate it. I like to talk about it like it's weather conditions. Okay, it's out of your control and there's nothing you could do to prepare for it. But it's rare. It's very, very rare, and most interviewers are trained to not do that. Okay, the next thing I'll say here is that interviewers might nudge. Um, what that means is they might ask you to clarify, or they might ask a follow-up. It might feel like you're hanging out on a particular part of the interview a little longer than you expected or longer than you would like. It feels like there's a little bit of an obstacle in the road to overcome. This is usually because the interviewer is really trying to get the signal they need and they're struggling to get it. So if they ask you a question that they consider a nudge, it is really to help you. And if they don't ask you these questions, it's usually because you just already give them what they need. So, in my experience as an interviewer, it's way more fun to do an interview when the candidate crushes the interview in a good way because it makes it, I don't have to do as much work during that interview. It's kind of it's almost like on a happy path. It's sliding down the hill on some skis, it's all great. The time goes by faster. I enjoy it. And yeah, so I just want you to know the interviewer is rooting for you because it's going to make this time more enjoyable for them. An example to tie back to problems, let's say an interviewer asks you, hey, like, are there any other problems that you might consider? That's a nudge that the breadth of problems you propose might not be wide enough, or they maybe don't really agree with the way you're framing your problems. So If and then when you get to solutions, they might ask, "Oh, are there any other angles that you'd consider to solve this problem?" That would be another nudge to say, "Hey, like I need you to give me more to work with here. I don't have enough signal." Okay. Um, in general, time management is so critical. I cannot repeat this enough. So I really do recommend that every single second and minute that you spend on these interviews is meant to give the interviewer the signal that they need. And if something does not provide signals, cut it. For example, there's an analytical thinking interview that is a completely separate rubric, completely separate process than the product sense interview. That one is where you should showcase your ability to do metrics, identify North Star goals, like those kind of things. Um, you do not want to try to like fit goals and metrics into this interview. I've seen some people try to do it sometimes, and it just like derails the conversation. I have to just be like, hey, I'm not really looking for that right now. So just like don't do that. Sometimes people like to ask, like, hey, like how many is enough? Like how many segments, how many problems, how many solutions? Generally speaking, I think you could sometimes get away with two, but my rule of thumb is if you're in doubt about whether you're doing it well enough, I would go with three for the number that you kind of like consider, and then I would evaluate them on two dimensions. Where this goes really wrong is sometimes people come up with like four segments or like four problems or five problems, and they're like, look how smart I am. I can come up with all these problems. The problem with that is that then you need to score them on, there's like a lot more cells almost in your matrix that you need to score. So you don't want to do that, and you definitely don't want to start extending yourself into like five problems on like three dimensions, or you're going to go full blown rice, like reach, impact, confidence, effort. Now you've got like four dimensions on five problems. You've got 20 cells in your matrix to fill out. It's way too much. It's gonna eat up your time. So I would keep it simple. And often interviewers might not even ask you to like walk them through every cell of that matrix, but you will want to be able to rationalize the segment you chose, walk me through why, that's the segment, and tie your rationale to the dimensions. Problem that you pick, tell me about why that problem, and then ideally walk me through your rationale for the score you gave it along the key dimensions you scored it on, the same for solutions. The next one is more philosophical, conceptual for those of you who maybe like chess. Is that when you make a move in chess, and just like this interview, depending on how skilled you are, you will anticipate the next step ahead. And even if you're not great at chess, I do want you to understand that this interview is like a game of chess. And what I mean by that is that the segment that you pick is going to corner you in to a set of problems, a problem space. And then the problem that you pick is going to corner you into a solution space. So as long as you are keeping mindful, you are continuing to be mindful of that dynamic, and you don't corner yourself into too narrow of a space, you should be okay. But if you corner yourself into a problem that really only has like one possible solution because it's too narrow of a problem, that will hurt you. Okay, backtracking. So let's say you made a mistake. You're playing this game of chess, you regret the move you made, unlike in chess. You can backtrack in an interview like this, but it's really important to call it out explicitly. Don't try to bury it. Say, hey, I was thinking a little bit more about the problems here, and I'm realizing that I think the segment that I picked is probably not as specific as I would like it to be. So I'm just going to take 30 seconds to a minute and just kind of reconsider some of my segmentation, if that's okay with you. You can totally go back and do that. Call it out. Ideally, the sooner you backtrack, the better because you'll burn less time.